Sea lions targeted. Fury erupts over proposed sea lion killings as salmon crisis deepens across Pacific Northwest. A heated debate is unfolding across the Pacific Northwest after officials in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho propose expanding the lethal removal of sea lions in an effort to protect struggling salmon populations and preserve regional fisheries. Now let's dive deeper and explore every hidden detail behind this story in our AI
Picture
podcast.
this. You are commuting home on a massive multi-lane highway.
It's a pretty normal day, right?
Yeah, totally normal. But suddenly, without any warning, all those lanes just merge into a single, incredibly narrow tunnel.
Which is already a nightmare.
Oh, a total nightmare, but it gets worse. Waiting for you at the exit of that tunnel is a gang of 800-pound professional thieves just waiting to mug you for your groceries.
Oh, man.
And they are there every single day. I mean, that is exactly what endangered salmon are facing right now in the Pacific Northwest.
It's a brutal reality.
It really is. Today's deep dive is drawing from a really comprehensive report titled Salmon versus Sea Lions, the Northwest Predation Battle. And our mission today is to unpack this ecological nightmare.
Right.
We're looking at a situation where wildlife managers are literally being forced to choose which protected species actually gets to live.
It is the absolute definition of ecological triage. I mean, to really understand the stakes here, you have to look past that initial image of just two animals interacting in the wild.
Right, it's bigger than that.
Much bigger. This is a massive collision. It involves multi-billion-dollar local economies, the sovereign treaty rights of Native American tribal fisheries, and honestly, a heavily altered landscape.
Because we built over it.
Exactly. Human architecture has completely rewritten the biological rules of survival out there.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because on the surface,
Yeah.
this just sounds like the food chain doing what the food chain does.
Predators eat prey.
Right. But the numbers in the source material tell a totally different story. We were looking at an estimated 4,000 to 4,500 sea lions currently inhabiting the Columbia River Basin.
It's a huge population.
And they're treating human-made bottlenecks, like the Bonneville Dam and Willamette Falls, as an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Well, the geography of those dams is really the root of the crisis here.
How so?
So when salmon and steelhead migrate upstream to spawn, they are forced to navigate through these fish ladders.
Okay.
And these ladders are incredibly narrow stepped pools. They are designed to help the fish bypass the massive concrete dams.
But they squeeze everyone together.
Exactly. It concentrates millions of fish into a space that is literally just a few feet wide.
Before we go any further, the report keeps mentioning salmon and steelhead together.
Right.
For those of us who aren't, hardcore anglers, what exactly is a steelhead? Like, why are they lumped in here?
That is a great question. So a steelhead is essentially a rainbow trout, but it acts like a salmon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they are what we call anadromous. That means they hatch in freshwater rivers, migrate all the way out to the ocean to grow for several years, and then swim back up the exact same river to spawn.
Wow, so they make that same crazy journey.
They do, and by the time these fish reach the Bonneville Dam, they have traveled hundreds of miles. They are physically exhausted.
Just totally spent.
Completely. And waiting for them at these tiny bottlenecks are massive marine mammals.
Yeah, the report mentions two specific species, right?
Right. We are talking about California sea lions, which can weigh up to 800 pounds.
Which is huge.
It is. But then you also have stellar sea lions, which are just absolute behemoths.
How big do they get?
Well, male stellars can actually tip the scales at 2,500 pounds.
Wait, really? 2,500 pounds?
Yes. They are massive.
So you have a 2,500-pound immovable object just camping out at a 3-foot wide doorway.
Exactly. And that bottleneck creates a staggering imbalance.
I can imagine.
Yeah, according to the data driving the current policy proposals, sea lions are, at times, consuming up to 4 times more salmon than what commercial fishermen and Native American tribes harvest annually combined.
4 times more. I mean, that volume of consumption is just wild.
It really is.
And the source material highlights this very specific, honestly shocking stat. During the 2025 spring migration season, nearly 1 in 4 salmon that actually managed to pass through the Bonneville Dam showed physical injuries.
Injuries linked directly to sea lion facts.
Almost 25% of them. That's insane.
It is. And what's fascinating here is how NOAA Fisheries interprets this specific behavior.
NOAA being the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Right. They point out that this congregation at the dams is no longer natural migration feeding.
Wait, hold on. Why is it not natural? I mean, out in the open ocean, a sea lion hunting a salmon is just biology, right?
Well, sure. Historically, sea lions hunted salmon in the vast open ocean or near the estuary at the mouth of the
Well,
river.
there's plenty of room.
Exactly. The fish had space to evade. But what is happening at the dams is completely different. It is a learned, socially transmitted hunting strategy.
So they are teaching each other.
Basically, yeah. This isn't instinct anymore. It's a cultural transmission among the sea lions.
That is wild.
One rogue male figured out the human-made architectural loophole, realized he didn't have to chase fish anymore, and the very next season, he brought his associates.
Like a network.
Exactly. It is an information network. They optimize their workflow by gaming our infrastructure.
It's important to note here, for you listening, that we're looking strictly at the data and the policy mechanics on the ground.
Right, setting the broader political theater aside entirely.
Exactly. Because Representative Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez recently urged the incoming Trump administration to authorize the direct, lethal removal of these sea lions.
And regardless of your political leanings, the raw math driving her push is really severe.
Yeah, you have an endangered fish population being systematically dismantled by an incredibly intelligent, adaptable predator.
And that intelligence makes removing them incredibly difficult.
Because they're protected, right?
Very much so. You have to remember that sea lions, both California and Stellar, are federally protected under the 1972 Marine Mammal Protection Act.
Okay, so what does that actually mean for the wildlife folks?
Well, that legislation generally outlaws the harassment, capture, or killing of marine mammals without explicit federal approval.
So if you were a wildlife manager and you were staring at this 2,500-pound animal eating its way through an endangered species, how do you even begin to physically stop it?
It's a huge challenge, but Congress did grant some leeway. In 2018, they expanded removal authority. This allowed officials to lethally remove up to 540 California sea lions and 176 Stellar sea lions over a 5-year period.
But they haven't actually removed that many, have they?
No, the actual number of removals has been far lower.
And when they do use the lethal method, what does that look like?
It involves trapping the animals in massive cages near the fish ladders and then euthanizing them with a chemical injection under veterinary supervision.
But they don't jump straight to lethal injections, right? I mean, the report talks heavily about non-lethal deterrence.
Yeah, they definitely try to scare them away first.
And their primary tool for this is something called a seal bomb,
Right.
which, I mean, just the name sounds intense.
Well, seal bombs are underwater explosive devices.
Wow.
The concept is auditory harassment. Wildlife managers throw these explosives into the water near the dams, aiming to create an acoustic environment so uncomfortable and terrifying that the sea lions just abandon the area.
And swim back to the ocean.
That's the idea, yeah.
This is where we need to look at the actual physics of what happens under the surface. Because, nature doesn't just neatly absorb our engineering.
No, it really doesn't.
I was reading the necropsy reports from the Marine Mammal Center that were in the source material, and the injuries linked to these seal bombs are just horrific.
They're very tough to read about.
How exactly does an underwater explosive cause so much physical damage to an animal that isn't even directly touching it?
It all comes down to how water handles pressure compared to air.
Okay.
Water doesn't compress.
So it doesn't squish down.
Right. So when you detonate an explosive underwater, the resulting shock wave doesn't dissipate easily like it would in the air.
It just keeps going.
Yes, it travels rapidly, acting like a solid, invisible brick wall moving at immense speed.
And when that shockwave hits a sea lion,
It passes right through their solid tissues. But when it hits a hollow, air-filled cavity, like their lungs, their sinuses, or their jaw structure,
the pressure changes.
exactly. The sheer difference in pressure causes those air pockets to violently compress and expand.
So the shockwave is literally tearing their tissues apart from the inside.
Tragically, yes.
I mean, the reports detail fractured jaws, severe burns, and massive internal trauma.
It's devastating.
So if our so-called humane, non-lethal deterrents are literally fracturing the jaws of these animals.
Which guarantees a slow, agonizing death by starvation in the wild.
Right. So is the lethal veterinary injection actually the more humane option here?
It is a devastating paradox for wildlife managers.
It really seems like it.
You are attempting to adhere to the spirit of the Marine Mammal Protection Act by preserving the animal's life. But the physical reality of acoustic weaponry in a fluid environment creates a level of suffering that completely contradicts animal welfare standards.
We're throwing concussive weapons at them to avoid the political optics of euthanizing them, but the result is arguably more barbaric.
And the craziest part is the sea lions are still coming back year after year.
Which just shows how high value this dam buffet really is.
Exactly.
Which brings us to what the critics of these policies are screaming from the rooftops.
Right, the environmental perspective.
Yeah, because when you look at the human interventions, the concrete bottlenecks, the underwater explosives,
It validates the core argument from environmentalists.
which is that humans are aggressively scapegoating the sea lions for a crisis that humans entirely created.
The historical context makes that argument very difficult to ignore.
Let's talk about that history.
Well, scientists and conservation groups are quick to point out the staggering scale of the salmon's decline over the last century.
Right.
The Columbia River Basin historically supported an estimated 10 million to 16 million salmon and steelhead annually.
10 to 16 million. I mean, that is a river just thick with fish.
Today, over 1/3 of those historic populations are entirely extinct.
Wiped completely off the map.
Yes, and the runs that have survived are operating at tiny fractions of their historic numbers.
And a sudden army of sea lions didn't wipe out millions of salmon.
No, they certainly didn't.
The source material outlines the actual culprits, and honestly, it reads like a masterclass in ecosystem destruction.
It's a long list of human impacts.
Yeah, habitat destruction from logging, chronic overfishing in the early 20th century, industrial pollution,
Urban development paving over critical watershed areas.
water diversion for massive agricultural operations, and of course, towering above all of it, climate change.
Climate change is fundamentally altering the biology of the river.
Because the water's getting warmer, right?
Exactly. Salmon are cold water fish. Their entire physiological cycle relies on specific temperature ranges.
So what happens when the river warms up?
Well, as river temperatures spike, the warmer water inherently holds less dissolved oxygen, and simultaneously it accelerates the salmon's metabolism.
Oh man. So they are burning energy faster while literally suffocating.
Precisely. They are exhausting their fat reserves just trying to breathe.
Long before they even reach the gauntlet of the dams.
Exactly. And that is why conservationists argue that zeroing in on the sea lions is a massive distraction.
Because it ignores the root cause.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, fighting the sea lions is a highly visible, emotionally charged issue that pulls public attention away from the systemic trillion-dollar infrastructure and climate problems.
Right, like the dams themselves.
Hydroelectric dams don't just create bottlenecks for adult fish migrating upstream. They completely disrupt the outbound migration of juvenile salmon trying to reach the ocean.
Heavily increasing their mortality rates.
Exactly.
It is like trying to treat a chronic systemic disease with a cough drop.
That's a good analogy.
Lethally injecting a few dozen sea lions is the cough drop. It might temporarily silence the cough. You might get a few hundred more fish past the Bonneville Dam this spring.
But it does absolutely nothing to cure the underlying illness.
Right. The river is still fundamentally too warm, the concrete dams are still blocking the migratory path, and the ocean habitat is still degraded.
The public discourse definitely reflects that exact frustration.
The report has some great examples of this.
It did. The source material captures this dynamic perfectly through reactions on X.
Yeah, I remember those.
One user concisely laid out the biological defense, writing, "I do not support the mass slaughter of the sea lions, which are not invasive, for preying on their natural prey."
And that is such a crucial distinction.
It really is.
Because we often hear about culling invasive species like, the Burmese pythons in the Everglades.
Right, animals that shouldn't be there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But California and stellar sea lions belong in the Pacific Northwest ecosystem. They are native predators.
And another user pointed the finger squarely back at human architecture.
What did they say?
They stated, "The dams are basically making it so that they have an all-you-can-eat salmon buffet."
Yeah. The environmental defense of the sea lions is super robust, backed by decades of data on habitat loss.
Absolutely.
But having explored that angle, we have to pivot back to the very real, immediate human cost of inaction.
Because there is a serious human element here.
Definitely. Because if you are a commercial fisherman or a member of a tribal nation in the region, the historical debate about who ruined the river 80 years ago doesn't help you today.
No, it doesn't put food on the table. This is where abstract policy crashes into reality.
Let's talk about the tribal nations.
You have Native American tribes in the Columbia River Basin whose treaties with the United States government legally guarantee their right to fish in their usual and accustomed places.
Right, it's a legal right.
And salmon are not just a commodity for these tribes. They are a nutritional cornerstone and a deeply sacred cultural heritage.
So if the salmon disappear entirely, the federal government is effectively breaking those treaties.
Yes. The timeline of conservation is completely fractured depending on who you ask.
That makes a lot of sense.
Environmental organizations are operating on a decades-long timeline. They are advocating for dam removal and global climate policy.
The big picture stuff.
Right. But tribal fisheries and commercial fishermen are looking at a timeline of weeks and months.
They need fish right now.
Exactly. If the fish runs collapse this season, their businesses go bankrupt, and their cultural practices are immediately severed. They cannot afford to wait for systemic infrastructure reform.
Representative Gluesenkamp-Perez made a statement that really crystallizes that economic anxiety for her constituents on the coast.
What did she say?
She said, "When grocery prices are at record highs, it is insulting to my community to waste taxpayer dollars while fishermen continue to be denied their ability to put food on the table for their families."
And the behavioral adaptation of the sea lions is escalating that economic threat day by day.
Yeah, the source material also features a quote from a local resident defending the lethal removal policy.
Noting how drastically the environment has changed, right?
Exactly. They wrote, "They do not naturally come as far upstream as they have been, but they've learned fish like to congregate near obstructions like Bonneville or Willamette Falls. They decimate native salmon and the sturgeon populations."
This raises an important question about how wildlife management works when two protected or valued species are pitted against each other.
Which forces us to ask a really uncomfortable foundational question. And it's one that I want you, listening, to really chew on.
It's the core of the debate.
How do we as a society assign value to one native species over another?
Right.
Why does the fish get our fierce legal and physical protection while the mammal gets the veterinary injection or the underwater explosive?
Especially when it was our own concrete dams that caused the traffic jam in the first place.
Exactly. We built the hallway, we forced the exhausted fish into it, and now we are punishing the sea lions with lethal force for simply noticing the opportunity.
We are practicing ecosystem triage.
That's exactly what it is.
We are deciding who lives and who dies based entirely on our own economic, legal, and cultural priorities.
All while operating inside a habitat that we ourselves completely fractured.
The days of simply letting nature take its course in the Columbia River Basin are over. Nature's course has been dammed, diverted, warmed, and paved.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So what does this all mean for you, whether you live in Oregon or half a world away?
It's highly relevant for everyone.
The Pacific Northwest is stuck in an impossible loop, and this is not just a localized wildlife dispute.
No, it's a glaring, real-time preview of the incredibly difficult zero-sum choices humanity is going to face everywhere.
As we try to manage the natural world, we have fundamentally altered.
It forces a profound realization about our modern relationship with the environment.
Let's hear it.
Think about the sequence of events we just mapped out. Humans built massive hydroelectric dams that artificially gathered endangered salmon into tight, vulnerable bottlenecks.
Right, our infrastructure.
Now, humans are making the bureaucratic decision to trap and euthanize native sea lions.
Simply because those sea lions were smart enough to figure out our architectural mistake.
Exactly. So the provocative thought I want to leave you with is this.
Okay.
Are we actually practicing natural conservation anymore? Or have we just turned the entire Columbia River Basin into a giant, intensely managed aquarium where we are essentially playing God just to protect our own economy?
Wow. A giant managed aquarium where we decide the rules of survival based on what works for our ledgers.
That's the reality of it.
We broke the river, and now we are trying to manage the consequences with veterinary injections and concussive shock waves.
It is not engineering anymore. It is just triage.
It really is. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you. Keep looking for the why behind the headlines, and we will catch you next time.
Okay, one question for you. Do you believe hydroelectric dams are the real reason behind the collapse of salmon population in the Pacific Northwest, while sea lions are simply taking advantage of an easy food source? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.